When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. You've been watching a terrible movie for an hour. Do you leave or suffer through another hour because you've, quote, already invested the time? If you stay, you're falling for the sunk cost fallacy, making decisions based on past investments rather than on future value. Economists have long recognized this as irrational, but we all do it. In disagreements, the sunk cost fallacy makes us defend positions we no longer believe simply because we've already argued for them. The sunk cost fallacy turns disagreements into wars of attrition. You've been arguing for 20 minutes about where to eat dinner. Neither of you even cares anymore, but you've both invested so much emotional energy that backing down feels like a waste of your prior efforts. A couple stays in counseling for a relationship that died years ago, but only because they've already put in so much work or feel that way. A team continues with a doomed project because they've come too far to quit now. We throw good effort after bad, trapped by what we've already spent. In politics, the sunk cost fallacy perpetuates failed policies. Wars continue because soldiers already died, and we can't let their sacrifice be in vain. Personal relationships suffer from this kind of thinking too. Friendships that have become toxic persist because of shared history, and people stay in unfulfilling careers because years invested in the training for that very career. Recognizing the sunk cost fallacy can be liberating. The time, energy, or money you've already spent is gone, regardless of what you do next. The only question that matters is, what's the best choice going forward? In disagreements, this means being willing to abandon positions you've defended if they no longer make sense. It means ending arguments that have become pointless, even if you've already invested emotional energy. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is cut your losses and move on. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Elise Campaign. Elise serves as the Southern Environmental Law Center's representative and principal spokesperson on climate change and climate policy. She has worked on environmental policy, advocacy, and politics in Congress, NGOs, and the private sector for over 3 decades. Elise, tell us an argument story.
All right, thank you. Well, the introduction is the beginning of my argument story. It turns out working on climate seems to bring a lot more disagreement than one might think. So in some form, the argument that was at the beginning of my career is still what's vexing me, is that when folks say climate change isn't worth working on, it's too uncertain, too expensive, and what difference does it make if we act, because it's a global problem.
It's the same debate you were having 30 years ago as now.
Different form, but yeah, some iteration.
In terms of the counter arguments being it's too big, or it doesn't exist, or what could I do as one human being in a big complicated world? What are some of the other kind of common counter arguments that you run into as reasons for inaction?
Well, I think part of the reason there's a consistency to the arguments is because some of the arguments have been fueled by a discourse that is actually written in talking point memo form by fossil fuel interests. But it used to be decades ago, the problem isn't real. Remember hearings long ago with Bush era saying,
First Bush era,
CO2 is good for you. Grow trees with it. This is not a problem. This is, really attacking the science. I think some of that has faded away, but some of the same folks are still out there. And the other issues are really about where does it rank in terms of economic cost or opportunity and fairness, this sort of global question, or who's responsible and generational impact. Why does it matter to me if something's going to happen? And
right. There's so many arguments.
So many arguments.
Yeah, I want to tackle some of these specifically, but I'm also curious about, because it sounds like since you've been working on this for over 3 decades, you have had these disputes both with you and somebody else, or your organization and another organization, in libraries and potentially bars, but certainly in Congress too, and NGOs and around the globe. So is there an instance where this debate really crystallized in your mind that's kind of stands out as like a memorable conflict of these ideas that you were involved in?
Yeah, I think this really goes back to my childhood. I got inspired to work on environmental issues growing up on a farm in a rural part of Maryland. And you would think, euphemistically talking about the weather is supposed to be something that saves you from disagreement, right? That's what you're supposed, that's your safe space. And when you grow up with farmers and you see that those are often the tenders of the landscape and the folks who very much are attuned to climate and weather, like, is it a dry season for the crops?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on, with vulnerability or what's happening out there in the world? I got inspired to work in the environmental field in part because I noticed that many of the environmental policy debates were leaving out the folks who were kind of most directly on the landscape that was impacted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's still a source of like inspiration and opportunity to me, is that pierce the veil of what I think are false arguments.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That climate absolutely is something that all of us, it's not far away at all. It's something that we all have our hands on and we all are experiencing and we all have the opportunity to intersect with. And so it was kind of that early, like picturing
Mm-hmm.
the farmer who, when they heard I was going to go to college and study environmental issues, I'd get, chided. Like, why would you do that? I'm like, well, you're kind of doing the same thing here, tending your fields. But it was already kind of seen as.
You'd say, I'm inspired to do this because I grew up here on this very farm.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see yourself, you've talked a lot about, piercing the veil of bad arguments, what I would characterize as kind of a debate between your position on climate change and climate policy and alternative positions. Do you see your role over 30 years generally, or maybe more specifically in your role now? Do you see your role as a debater arguing over the facts of the case? Climate change is real. Climate change is worth fighting. Climate change is getting worse. Mm-hmm. More CO2 is bad for the atmosphere. Kind of fact-based questions. Do you see your role as a kind of persuader for the mushy middle of getting these things on people's radar? Do you see your role as inspiring people who might already agree with you on the facts, but just don't think there's anything we can do about it? Or probably all of the above. To some extent, I'm recognizing the limits of my question there, but take that on if you don't mind.
Sure. A little bit of all the above, and it kind of depends on the specific instance, but there's certainly a need and a place for the data and the science and sort of the mechanics of the policy argument. I see the most exciting space in working on climate is finding the areas of alignment. Climate truly touches everything and everyone. It's our food systems, it's our transportation systems, it's how we heat our homes. It's so I can start, the bar argument with somebody who sees me coming and thinks woke environmentalist, and it's a fun challenge to find out, like, all right, what do you care about? Like, tell me what you're working on, and whether that's like a challenge getting to work because streets were flooded. There was a big king tide, and it turns out our sea levels are rising, and the king tides are causing our roads to impede our commute. Or, drought patterns have truly changed the crop cycles or changed what the planting mix looks like in a given region. Or the people that are just working in a field of, they might not even think of themselves as part of the supply chain for energy innovation, but there's a lot of people who are in some way or another touching an element of what the array of climate solutions are. And so kind of that question of like, do you call it that? Like, where do words get in the way? A lot of times,
Yeah.
this is a rhetorical war, not a practical war.
I was just about to ask you about, and I'm so glad you said when words get in the way, because what I was hearing you saying, just to reflect it back and hear you think about whether this is what you're recommending directly, but I was hearing kind of a tacit recommendation of, if you want to find kind of common ground, a place where we can work together on a thorny, controversial issue where we might disagree on the facts and we might have really polarized reactions to words, highly politicized words like climate change or global warming or something along those lines, is actually to not use those words at all and to get specific about the consequences of the concept. So our sea levels are rising and I had to drive through a mini flood to work this morning. I haven't been able to get strawberries in X, Y, and Z months because of a drought and so forth, or hurricane patterns or stuff that affects people in very specific places. Is that a recommendation that you would support?
I think it depends what you're working toward. I think to build a broader movement, to build a bigger tent, if we want more people to feel empowered to be part of the solutions, it can be more effective to meet people where they are. So yes, talking about, in fact, this is made very explicit right now with this administration that has, in some ways, helpfully put out a literal list of words. These are acceptable, these are not, and work plans that were generated from grants that were given by the previous administration that talked very openly about climate change and environmental justice are being, grant officers are saying, just swap out climate change, environmental justice, and talk about housing values, helping families with young children, safety. I think that it is helpful at times, depending on what you're trying to achieve, to not get hung up on the words and to find those places of commonality. But at the same time, I think that people in roles like I have, it's also important not to cede the ground and to let the words become verboten. Climate change is real; it is happening. To both name it, but not use it as a litmus test. So I think it really depends on the venue or who you're talking to.
What do you see as the biggest obstacle to your work being effective right now in terms of the arguments? You gave several different arrows in the quiver of counter arguments at the beginning. This doesn't exist. It's too big. Other people are more responsible for us, so we shouldn't foot the bill, and more and more and more. At the beginning, if I heard you correctly, you were saying 30 years ago, you were running into more, at least the more dangerous or damning argument to overcome was this is not even a real thing, right? You're trying to find Bigfoot, and Bigfoot does not exist. Is that the same now, or are there different pernicious arguments kind of standing in your way?
I think it has evolved in that, as I said, the science arguments are there, but people can see more of it. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't been acting fast enough, and there is more evidence in the form of bigger, costly storms, sea level rise, people that can actually see some of the impacts, I think, more. The science has become more settled. At the time, the economic arguments and this whole question of if the U.S. acts, will be put at competitive disadvantage. The lie to that, since that was always peddled by, and now congressional reports have come out showing that ExxonMobil in 1984 actually had scientists telling them that fossil fuels were causing climate change, and they launched a disinformation campaign, and there was a lot of money put behind selling the argument that it would be costly and a real economic disadvantage. Fast forward to where we are right now, and markets alone, to forget what you think about climate change, the reality is that the bulk, 90% of the electricity that went on the grid globally last year was from batteries and clean and renewable sources. So we may still want to go over and say we can't afford to act. The reality is we can't afford not to act, both on the sides of the cost of the impacts, but also on the technology that's being deployed. So we're actually now behind China, India, and some of our European competitors on things, on manufacturing some of the industries of the future.
One of the things I'm eternally interested in and inspired by, fascinated by with guests on this show is when people have picked a big fight. And this, to me, seems like a big fight. The issue is existential, and so it's by definition a big fight. And then there's a lot of interests. You just mentioned one of them, funding disinformation campaigns. A lot of interests that go the other direction. And you're out-resourced in many cases. You might be behind several deadlines in the sense that you should have been acting, you say, in the 80s and 90s, and now here we are. What is that like to be in a fight that big?
It is daunting.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's disappointing that something like the weather, that climate change, it's something that touches us all so deeply, that it has become so polarized. I really didn't expect to see that in my lifetime. When I got into the environmental field, historically, a lot of our foundational environmental laws were written by Republicans. It wasn't a partisan issue. But I think it also is a reflection of how big the transition is that we're making. We're remaking the basis of our economy since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. To decarbonize it's a level of change that is, of course, it's going to be scary, and then that's going to inject these like big vested interests and things. So I guess what I'm saying is, if the bear weren't responding so much, it wouldn't be worth poking the bear. And I think that because it is so broad, there still is an opportunity to like have a really dramatic, positive impact to turn the right way.
Right.
So it's both daunting and inspirational.
Yeah, and given the scale of this, and given that many people think time is of the essence, it might feel like you kind of got to hit home runs to make any impact. In other words, you can't just hit singles, to continue my baseball metaphor.
Yeah.
Hit singles, taken out, hit another single, taken out. You got a person on second, maybe drive that person in. Okay, we got one more run on the board, 7 more to go. That's one way to think about it. But for many of us, or for many people who have some pessimism, maybe they believe in the science of what you're selling, but they just think, what can I really do to change my carbon footprint? What can I really do to recycle this cherry Coke bottle that's going to make any impact? Instead of there's a kind of how daunting this is can feel, I imagine to many people who are not even in the fight, they're just people you're trying to sell on being in the fight, can feel pretty overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's why it's really important to kind of break it into something relatable. Like climate is, you don't have to be a scientist or a senator to tackle this. It's so many decisions and how they ladder up to various outcomes. And much of the discussion, things that we're already paying for and experiencing are hidden. So like, what could I do? I just need to, go to my job, get my kid to school, sort of unearth the idea of like, you're already paying for it. How much of your energy bill has gone up? How much have you had any property insurance hikes, or have you noticed that the carriers are dropping all along the coast of our state, right and left? Like, what can we do about that? Kind of turning it into something that is already here and already showing up directly in people's lives. And then, okay, your energy bills have gone up. Did you know that there's a program out to put rooftop solar and a battery? And my neighbor last time there was a big outage, it was kind of cool. Like their power was still on, and that really helped them support their neighbors whose mother-in-law had needed to be on a medical machine that needed to be plugged in. And it goes from being something that other people are taking care of into, oh, it's already showing up in my life, and there are some positive things to move toward. Like, I think that's, people have to have hope to stay motivated, and both in conversation and in in building, toward an outcome.
And I mentioned this too, because this issue, I mean, your organization is obviously nonpartisan, but this issue is not, as of course a partisan issue, has always been a red state, blue state, an ideological issue, and is broken down there. And so to be successful, you need a community effort. And so the question for you about how to reach across party lines, as it were, or reach across from believers to disbelievers, or however it is, you consistently or articulate on a few points. One, make this issue yours, kind of take it out of the clouds. Part of that issue is making that issue local, what's affecting you and your community, and then making it actionable, making it feel like you and I can do something together. And there's some unique benefit to you and I doing something together, as opposed to letting other people handle it or not handle it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think countering the juggernaut of disinformation, which is hard given the size of the megaphone that the oil and gas industry have, is turning it into something that people can kind of test in their own, against their own experience. So another example of that might be something like, boy, are we getting hit with EVs? Woo! Lefty agenda, gonna catch on fire, won't work, can't get from point A to point B. And then you talk with somebody or show them like some of the small light duty EV trucks or Rivian, and you're using it to haul something. And then it turns out you're in a conversation like, did you know you don't have to get any oil changes? And the last time I took this into the shop was, over a year ago. And you're into kind of like, do you like filling up all the time and going to the gas station and having all those price fluctuations? Do you like,
do you love mechanics?
Yeah. Do you love going to the shop? And then you start to see like, oh yeah, like this conversation about the ideology of whether we are or aren't for EVs is just like, it's kind of noise. It really depends on your own.
Yeah. The words get in the way. Here's another example to me.
Yeah.
And then shifting it to finding common values like saving money, saving time, not dealing with the hassle of constantly being at the gas station. These sound like the kind of common ground moves that you're tacitly making to get out of what your preconception of this conversation about the quote unquote environment is.
Yeah.
And who are the people who really believe in this stuff, and to make it specific, actionable, local, and personal. One way in which as I was saying that, I was struggling with this final issue, which is how to find common ground on this. Because one of the things that is a real creature of a polarized age is our polarized perception of what's true. And so one of the ways that you have really had to sell what's true in terms of the necessity of climate action on the climate or climate policy, is to sell the science. Right? You've said a few times on this show, well, the science says, the science says. But we all know that that's now highly politicized, as is everything. What kind of shoes I have on right now are highly politicized.
Yeah.
And so it's not as easy anymore to say, well, studies say, because it's automatically into the vortex of mis and disinformation. And so have you found it harder to sell the science in the past 10, 20 years?
I think what's happened is that we've kind of moved on from it as being, we're not doing it for the science in most instances. And so the science remains important, especially in addressing the impacts. But in terms of the interventions to combat climate change, one one of the interesting features of the last several years, even though it was a big Democratic supposed Green New Deal passing the Inflation Reduction Act, it was red states, Republican states, the 6 states that I work in, had $20 billion of projects invested, unleashed $78 billion of private investment. And so the jobs that people are going to, you're working at Redwood Batteries that's recycling batteries and creating a domestic supply chain. You're working at Hyundai or Scout, building EVs in the same states where people are like, vehemently saying they don't want them. The transition is happening as we're arguing about it, and so the science is important, and you can be in a congressional hearing and say, yes or no, this scientist is right or wrong, but like the world is moving forward kind of at the same time. And I really think that the question of people seeing accelerated costs and size of the disasters that have happened in our lifetime opens a space of at least like, well, they might not have every detail right, but I sure as heck know that these billion-dollar disasters are becoming much more common. And so I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where it's like this side has the scientific points to justify the intervention. I think what's shifted and important is having enough science-based information to use that when designing the policy, while also recognizing that this was something I've said for years, was like, well, so what if we're wrong? Like, we still build really cool products, sell them, have the lights on. You still, get your energy delivered to do the functional things that you want. Like, I wish that we had passenger rail and transit, not because I'm just doing it because of the climate. I just don't like driving all the time. And I sure would rather hang out with my kid and, read a book when I'm getting from point A to point B. So these other benefits kind of mitigate, I think, this question of whether or not the science is it's not meant to ever be certain. That's the nature of the discipline.
Let me close with kind of a big question. What kind of sense do you make of the fact that you are still having the same arguments after 30 years? In other words, if you could look back and say some lessons that you've learned about how to more productively have the same argument over and over again, what would those be?
I think as I look back, it was for too long constructed as a top-down issue. It was happening to people. And again, because of the nature of the issue being so huge, I can understand why that happened. And I don't know if I could have rewritten the script if we would have been able to start it as a bottom-up kind of issue. But one of the lessons that I've taken from it is that the environmental movement, and many times I think got it a little wrong in being really prescriptive. Government's going to have the answer. We'll do this regulatory scheme, whether it's a carbon tax or tax and dividend, and we all have our favorites, or this regulatory authority at that agency. You need some of that, but we kind of undercut the opportunity for people to feel empowered to be part of the conversation, because it was just like, kind of either I'll wait until they figure it out, or, government's not made really to drive the kinds of solutions and innovation that are needed to tackle the issue of this type. So I think we could have made it a little less academic. Yeah.
As a college professor, those are words that
those are fighting words.
No, they ring pretty true for me. It was like, let's come out of the clouds a little bit. Yeah. Let's get a little academic-y in here for my taste.
Yeah.
Elise Campagne, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.